Hi, everyone. Welcome. I spend most of my time with marketing leaders who already get the value of brand. You don't need convincing. Where things get more complicated and where I spend much of my time at Brand Active is when brand decisions suddenly get very real, very fast, usually because something bigger is happening in the business. And what I hear over and over again is the same need: help navigating the moment when brand moves out of theory and into real timelines, real budgets, and real consequences. Right now, about half of bank boards have identified M&A as a strategic priority, not something they're watching or thinking about, something they are actively planning for. And most of the activity we expect to see isn't driven by massive headline deals. It's happening in the mid-market, where transactions move faster, financing is more accessible, and regulatory hurdles are lower. Statistically speaking, there's a very good chance that some of you will be directly involved in a merger, acquisition, or major brand change in the next few years. And there's a decent chance that that person is you. And when that moment comes, marketing is often asked to move more quickly than expected. You're expected to have all the answers about cost, timing, customer impact, and execution, often while the details are still coming into focus. And in moments like that, credibility comes from showing up the same way that every other function does, with a clear operating plan, thoughtful trade-offs, and an understanding of what things actually cost. That expectation shows up consistently in the work we do at Brand Active, especially in M&A and transformation scenarios, where marketing is suddenly accountable for not just how things look, but how change actually rolls out. And that's what earns marketing a seat at the table when decisions are being made. It's especially important in a role that sits at a unique intersection of strategy, perception, and execution. The CMO remains one of the shortest tenured roles in the C-suite. According to Spencer Stewart, across large organizations, roughly 1 in 5 CMOs turn over every year, with an average tenure of just under 4 years. That reality makes it even more important for marketing leaders to be seen not just as brand stewards, but as operators who can lead through change. And I believe that that's where our role is evolving. We still protect the brand, that doesn't go away. But we also need to be the people who can calmly say, here's what this will take, here's what we'll prioritize, and here's how we'll do it without losing customers or momentum. The leaders you're about to hear from today have done exactly that. They've navigated brand change inside of real organizations with real constraints, and they've made hard calls about what to evolve, what to preserve, and what to retire. And they've learned to balance growth, efficiency, and customer trust along the way. Today isn't about chasing trends or blowing things up. It's about evolving with discipline. So when change comes, marketing isn't reacting. It's actively helping to lead. Welcome to the Brand Evolution Playbook, renewed relevance through modernized banking brands. We've asked 3 experts in rebranding to join us to discuss ways for marketers to play a key role during the rebranding exercises that many of you will experience. Let's start off with Anthony, Jolie, followed by Chad. Please tell us a bit about yourself and your expertise within rebrands.
Thanks, Sarah. And hi, everyone. I'm Anthony Bonamassa. Good to meet all of you today. During my career, I've led rebranding efforts to modernize and elevate the client experience across various industries and global regions. And this includes time leading the brand implementation team at Interbrand in New York, leading the brand activation at MetLife during their rebrand in 2017, and in my current role at Citi, where I lead the visual identity and brand standards team as we refresh the Citi brand back in 2023 and continue to evolve that today and going forward. So, very excited to be here today, and I'm looking forward to the fun and insightful conversation.
Jolie, you might be on mute. Let's go over to
What's that?
Let's go over to Chad while we get Jolie's audio sorted out.
And I'm Chad.
I'll try again in a minute.
Oh, you're actually good. Let's go to you, Jolie.
Sorry, it's connected to my headset. Sorry about that. I'm Jolie Murtha. I lead integrated brand marketing at Truist, and I'm in Atlanta. And I've spent my career in brand marketing, creative strategy, and was fortunate enough to work on the the brand reveal, the brand identity for Truist a few years ago. So excited to be here with you all today.
And I'm Chad Langford, and I spent my career as well in brand evolution and production, both on the agency side as well as the client side. I led an agency for about 15 years, working with dozens of Fortune 500s across the United States and internationally with rebranding efforts, as well as on the client side, I led the Gesa Credit Union in Washington State acquisition of a couple different financial institutions and rebrand as well. So I'm really excited to be here.
Let's start with where most of these stories begin, not with the design, but when the moment the mandate lands on your desk. Most brand changes don't start in the marketing department. They start in the boardroom as a strategic shift, a signal of growth, or a result of an M&A. So when that mandate first landed on your desk, how did you move the conversation from what it looks like to how do we actually pull this off? Let's start with Jolie.
Yeah, sure. When the mandate hit our desk, the leadership team had made the decision that we were going to become a new company. We were a merger of equals, but becoming a new company. So moving that into operations was all about maintaining business with our current companies and brands while we create a new name, a new company, a new culture, everything for where we were going. So it essentially was operating like three businesses at the same time. And it was very important that we talked about it like that, the two existing companies, the two existing books of business, two existing goals, all while building NewCo. And it was called NewCo for quite a long time until we got to Truist. So it was absolutely the creating and building something, but operating like three businesses until we could become one.
Yeah, in our situation, it was actually very similar to Jolie's. It was an acquisition, a merger of equals. That's how it was positioned. But it was a catalytic moment for us because we hadn't refreshed our brand in over 15 years, and so it was a great opportunity for us to really take a hard look at our brand. We went through several exercises to decide whether it was a complete new brand that we were going to move forward with, or just a refresh of the existing brand. And throughout that process, we learned a lot of really important things about how our brand was perceived with our existing marketplace and prospective customers that we were getting ready to acquire. And so it was a really interesting exercise for us, and we quickly realized that it was a huge undertaking for us, and we did not have the internal resources to be able to tackle something that large. And with the regulators' requirements around how quickly we had to transition, we realized very quickly that we needed some outside help, and to get some outside help that was very experienced in this type of a rebrand and situation. And that's one of the reasons that we decided to move forward with Brand Active, having that expertise that we desperately needed.
Yeah, that's always the big thing here. When you have this huge vision that you want to make a big change and make a big splash to the brand itself, and then you have to then take that into terms of practicality, and that's always the big challenge here. So I totally understand that Chad and Jolie and come across the exact same things. At Citi, for example, we knew we couldn't do it all at once due to a lack of incremental budgets to expedite it. So we had to really pivot to the use of teams' annual budgets. Each part of the client experience involves multiple teams, and these teams can't be synchronized to update the same experience at one time. Each has their own natural refresh timeline, and branches are a perfect example of this. If you look at the exterior signage to the interior signage to the marketing materials, they're all with differing timelines. And with these differing timelines comes a timing issue and a budget issue. So, for example, the exterior signage natural timeline is over 11 years at Citi. So it's nearly impossible to synchronize it all. So to ease the synchronicity and budgeting issues, we conceived a brand refresh, similar to what you were talking about, Chad, which was really designed to specifically exist in the same space as a legacy brand, where each part of the visual identity is unique compared to the legacy brand, but connected enough to prevent a disjointed client experience. So we did this by only modifying our logo to connect it closer to our bespoke typography. We kept a similar main color palette, but expanded it with secondary colors and revisions to the blues. And we provided a more modern and cohesive strategy for our photography and illustration. The only thing that was completely new was the typography itself. So the experience became modern, elevated, and refreshed, but still visually connected to our legacy brand, which prevented a disjointed brand experience. And this allowed teams times to transition over a 3-year period and budget accordingly within their respective annual budgets because it didn't have to be done all at once, which proved to be successful both fiscally and with timing and worked out really well for us.
Yeah, and I think, Anthony, you're hitting on something so important. Like there can be, doesn't always happen this way, but a friction between the creative vision and the financial reality of what you're able to actually achieve. I'd love to hear about your experiences when having to defend a budget or rationalize assets, and has that ever led to a forced change in brand direction?
Yeah, I can jump in here. Whenever speaking to executive stakeholders for approval, you need options for budget. Generally speaking, when you design a new brand launch, you can do it in one of two real ways. You can have a targeted date where everything switches over in an instant, which has the greatest PR impact, but has huge budget and planning implications to have things ready for a designated date. Or you can go ahead with a phased, budget-friendly approach where you have a lighter fiscal impact and time to naturally sunset some things, but also less of that whiz-bang moment, if you will. You have to really measure out what's more important to the executive decision makers here. So at Citi, I presented two options for funding this, and this is where having a great partner like Brand Active is incredibly important. With Brand Active, we developed two approaches and the subsequent fiscal impact scenarios for that. One had things planned to transition in a very short timeline. I think it was 3 years, 4 years, maybe 5, but was considerably more expensive and really required an incremental budget, which we did not have at that time. The other was a phased approach, so over several years, allowing for natural sunsetting of touch points and the use of annual budgets to fund this. So at Citi, we went with the phased approach because the executive stakeholders were okay with having the refreshed brand live with the legacy one. And they agree that the risk of that inconsistent brand experience was relatively low. This is based on how we went with a refreshed visual identity, as I mentioned before, and not a completely new one. Also, the positive impact of using teams' annual budgets to fund this was very high, so it was clearly the most cost-effective plan for the firm to use, which was a major factor in deciding on this approach.
Chad, did you want to comment next?
Yeah, there was, I mean, to Anthony's point, it's pretty rare that you're going to do an entire refresh or rebrand in one fell swoop. Especially for larger institutions. And so we utilized a pretty phased approach as well. There was a little bit of friction between, the creative vision and the financial reality, because from the creative perspective, especially around brand, you want everything changed dramatically and instantly and to really take advantage of that impact of the new brand. But the financial reality is you just can't do it all at once. And so, really measuring and having a thoughtful approach around, what can we do in specific phases that do have the most impact, but also, meeting those financial requirements for the institution to make sure it's an effective and spread out over time and in a financially responsible way.
And just to add on there, my experience from creating a new brand, a new company, it was really important for us to start internal and then external, bringing our employees along with us in the process, making sure that everybody in the company knew when things were going to happen and why they are being phased like they are, so that they felt comfortable talking about it in the community and with our clients. And from there, we too phase things. Phase things from a couple of different perspectives, right? You phase them from visibility. Is it highly visible versus less visible? Is it core, non-core, levels of risk? So very intentional in the phasing of every part of it, for sure.
Yeah, that's really
that's where the prioritization really comes critically.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's for me, like the budget conversations, they're not really about saying what we can't do, but it's more about how do we prioritize what's most important and how do we make the trade-offs visible, so that we can really launch with the most amount of brand impact, with a budget that makes sense for the entire organization. And to follow up on that, when you're in the room with the CFO, you really need hard numbers. How do you prioritize? How do you use data for that prioritization on what to change, what to retire, what to keep? How do you make the math work? Let's start with Chad.
Yeah, and that's really a challenge because there's the ideal world and then there's the reality behind everything. When you create these budgets, you work really hard to find all the vendors and all the resources that you really need to change all of the collateral and signage and everything. But there's a lot of time that goes by from when you actually submit the budget and when you actually get into production and change everything. So one of the important things that I learned was, and that was shared with me from Brand Active as well, was having contingency plans in place to make sure that yes, this is ideally how it's going to work, but we have contingencies for each of the vendors, for each of the production cycles, to make sure that things are going to go wrong, and you're going to have some things thrown at you that during the process that you need to be prepared for as much as possible. And so having that initial budget for everything, but also contingency plans with financial aspects around those. Just to make sure that you're not, caught in a tricky situation.
Just building on that, I think, being in the banking industry and the finance industry, everybody always is focused on expenses. So, that's just a constant conversation that's always happening. We really tried to lean into the transformation part of the conversation, like this brand conversion is an opportunity to transform ways that we're doing business, transform our processes, transform our product portfolios. We were 250-year-old companies coming together. So it was an opportunity to transform a lot of things. And it also created an opportunity for us to start, use that executive audience to talk about brand value and brand equity and the long-term impact of having a strong brand.
Mm-hmm. That's really well put, Jolie, because I was talking before about speaking to executive stakeholders and how you need to present them with options. But another critical part of those conversations that whenever speaking to these stakeholders, you also need to speak their language, similar to what you're saying here. Mm-hmm. Many times you're talking to people who don't necessarily see the same value in marketing and branding as you do. So I always look at how a project like this can support business goals, which is something they will give value to if you can speak that language. I'm sure many people on this call would have experienced the same thing. For us at Citi, we were going through a business transformation, similar to what you're talking about, but Jolie, but a little bit different in the scope, because we were really shifting globally to more of an institutional client business as opposed to consumer one. So as such, we partnered with Brand Active to define rationalizing the institutional touch points as a priority, so that we were able to show how this was not just a quote unquote art project, but an initiative that directly supported business goals that tie into a firm-wide transformation of the business. So a good partner like Brand Active, it was really pivotal in defining the rationalization and prioritization of these specific institutional client experiences and really connect them to the overall goals of the business, which just makes it easier for executive stakeholders to see the business value in this type of project. This then allowed them to really provide like that top-down support, which is what we all need ultimately, which made things easier in the end for me specifically. I'm sure for many of you if you go through the same thing. So with Brand Active, we looked at touch points that provided the greatest impact to our institutional clients and had the highest visibility in their experience. And this was really successful in demonstrating to the executive stakeholders how a branding exercise like this provides more to the firm than just like a visual facelift.
I think they're all really great points. It can often be surprising what a great opportunity finding efficiencies in your brand operations can be as part of a rebrand, because you truly are leaving no stone unturned as you're going through what needs to be changed over, how things get updated. It's a really great opportunity for you to really take stock of those efficiencies and also create some great connections with your finance team as well. Now, we've talked a lot about the ideal state, having the plan, the budget, the data, and I think we all know the reality is often much messier. And before we get into some confessions from our panelists, I want to take a temperature of the webinar attendees. I'm curious, we're going to put a poll up on the screen. When you think about evolving your brand right now, what is the single biggest operational barrier standing in your way? Is it the buy-in, your leadership or culture is resistant to change? Is it the budget? You can't get the CFO to sign off. The complexity, the sheer volume of assets could be overwhelming. The technology, like legacy systems, making it hard to modernize. I'll give everyone a couple of minutes just to answer that question. And I can see the attendee list. So I know some of you have already been through rebrands. So curious, even if you're looking back historically.
While they answer that, Sarah, you can probably make a case for each one of those. I mean, to say which one is the biggest barrier, it's the biggest barrier today, and that might change tomorrow. So it's really all of them are huge barriers. It's really how to handle each one and pivot accordingly.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree with you, Anthony. It's kind of all of it together. It can be a hard question to answer. Okay, results coming in. It looks like the complexity is what is really challenging for people. I mean, taking an inventory of when you have thousands, usually in financial services, tens of thousands of assets can be really complex. And then being able to go through them and rationalize like we've been talking about can double down on that. So let's drop the corporate polish for a minute. And I really would love to hear the insider reality from each of you. Thinking about the barriers that are top of mind for our audience, or really any of the barriers, because Anthony, to your point, they all work together. I'd love to hear about a specific moment in your rebrand where you really hit a wall. I'll start with you, Anthony.
Yeah, I can probably speak to each one of these, but I'll go with the one that usually hits first, even though complexity is a major one, but usually the budget comes first, because you have this vision of what you want to do and then how you're going to pay for it. So that's always a huge factor. And as I mentioned earlier, at Citi, we took the approach of using annual budgets to fund this. The problem that we had with this strategy was that these annual budgets were being cut year over year, and that wasn't what we originally planned for. So I needed to get these teams to request additional funding just to meet the original goals that were within reach for what was the expected budget, but not with the reduced one. So being that this was happening for many teams, I had to shift the timing for completion to like an additional year, just because they had to really plan accordingly, which gave these teams a buffer to complete and was rationalized due to the firm-wide budget cuts, which provide an acceptable shift because it was still the most cost-effective approach. And then when you're looking at the other hurdles here, like the buy-in, you can say, because I have a pretty interesting, unique story about buy-in on here and how it can result in really unforeseen situations. We were talking about pivoting before, and this is definitely one of those. So at MetLife, we were shifting away from a 30-year-old brand identity using the Peanuts character, Snoopy and so forth. Some of you might remember that from a while ago. It's been around for 30 years. So it was time to move over because we were looking to modernize to a younger audience that really wasn't culturally connected to Snoopy. And this was not met with any real trepidation, as employee engagement and buy-in was high for this, except in South Korea. In South Korea, Snoopy was still a huge cultural icon, especially with the MetLife employee base, which was interesting. Didn't really expect that. So I became known as the guy who, quote unquote, killed Snoopy, which is not a joke. That was actually a real thing because the program was called D-Snoop. Again, that was not a joke either. That's also a real thing. So in order to get employee buy-in, specifically in South Korea, it required deeper engagement with these employees, really to demonstrate why this was the best strategy for the business, despite the cultural significance of the characters in that particular region, which was eventually successful taking this approach because it was getting the point across that this was still best for the business. So it was an interesting exercise in how cultural impact can affect a rebrand despite the business impact of it.
to follow Anthony with a few of my confessionals. It's definitely a mix of complexity and maybe not so much leadership buy-in, but keeping the leadership team with you throughout the process, for me. And, we had such a phased and intentional plan for how everything would roll, once we announced that we're going to be Truist. We've got this beautiful new brand and logo and color and plan on how we're going to roll it out. Just complexities that are true things that hit us. Our reveal was scheduled to happen March of 2020. And, I'm sure most of you remember that is exactly when the COVID pandemic hit the world. And our moment to reveal the Truist brand was to happen at one of our signature properties, Truist Park here in Atlanta. And, we had met every deadline. We had, kind of maintained our expense expectations. Every sign at the stadium had been changed. Everything was ready to go. And then the world shut down. And, you have to adjust for things like that. You really now even have to kind of plan for things like that. You're intentional, you've got a plan, it's phased, but things will come up as you go to execute your plan. And it really does matter that you have the right experts with you on the journey to, have talked about some things like that along the way and to help you through those moments and make the right decisions from there going forward as well.
Yeah, those are great points. And, to build on what Jolie says, we had a lot to get buy-in was it was a very lengthy process just because we had a lot of our own internal opinions and expertise, but, senior executive leadership, they like to, kind of vet things out externally as well. And so that was one of our biggest struggles is, first of all, everybody wants to get involved with the rebrand, and you have these gigantic committees typically that everybody wants to be involved, and it's really difficult to get everybody on the same page when everybody has an opinion. And so then, leveraging some outside expertise to have more of an objective view on which direction we should go and, what all we should change and all of that was, again, a whole nother situation that created its own complexities. So it was working through all of that and, working through a lot of focus groups and brand studies and really trying to get as much data and information as we could to make an educated decision on which direction to go. Again, that just adds a lot of complexity to everything. But eventually you have to make a decision and move forward. And we were able to work through all of that, with some great resources, both internally and externally, and with a lot of help from Brand Active as well. But then you get into the asset portion of it, and again, it's extremely complex. You're finding thousands and thousands of collateral items that need to be changed. Then you start realizing that wow, there's some collateral items in there that are from 4 refreshes ago that were never found, and it's kind of comical to find all of these things throughout the process. But again, it adds a lot of complexity because you quickly realize that there's so much to change that needs to be done so quickly that, finding the resources to convert all of those things it's a difficult thing to do. And then hopefully you budgeted correctly because, you don't realize how much is there until you really dig in and audit everything. And so that's another contingency that, you just have to make sure you have in there that, what kind of resources are you going to need from a design perspective or a programming perspective? And there's a lot of things that, you start analyzing things that maybe this doesn't need to be on paper anymore. Maybe we can convert it to digital throughout that process, which is a whole nother process that you have to be prepared for, both budgetary and from a resource perspective. And again, leveraging a good partner like Brand Active is really, really crucial throughout that entire process.
Those are all really great points. I think it can be. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Anthony.
I was just going to jump in and say, because I don't think we covered the technology side. Chad gave a great example about complexity and Jolie too. But for the technology side, sometimes it comes down to the technology strategy and how it can affect your timing and approach. For example, at Citi, there was a major effort to consolidate the various UX design systems from several to one overall approach. And that was due to how the UX design was split across each business, where each had their own design system. Eventually, these teams were consolidated into one with the goal of developing one overall design system. But that would work across all businesses, but takes time to actually accomplish. So we had to continuously push out timelines for some important digital touch points due to the change in team structure and the delay in finalizing this new system. So we made sure that some critical updates were done, like the refreshed logo and the core colors on some of these digital experiences, but the adoption of a single system had to wait, which is something that you can't control or necessarily foresee, and that sometimes comes down to the technology and the strategy of that technology itself.
Yeah,
just adding on to the technology piece, when you have a merger of equals coming together to be a new company, something as basic as your online banking. Do you keep one of your existing online banking, technologies, or do you build a new one? I mean, it's those kind of decisions. And then what does that interface and that experience look like and feel like as you become the new company? So I guess how you kind of come together and how you want to convert and go forward, certainly those technology decisions are complex as well.
Yeah, it can often be surprising how a rebrand will touch every single person in the organization. Every department needs to come to the table to be able to bring a rebrand over the finish line, and it's so far reaching. And when you have those two things together, the risks can be quite high, whether it's something completely beyond your control, like you mentioned, Jolie, like a global pandemic, or something that's more involved with a regulatory body, and figuring out how to navigate those situations can be really tricky. But when you set yourself up from the beginning with the right structure and having thought about the right things, you're set up for success in a very different way. I'm curious from each of you, if someone on this webinar is getting the rebrand mandate next week, what are the first 3 things that they should do? Let's start with Chad.
Oh, that's a tough one. Boy, I'd have to think about that. Really, meeting with the senior executive team to find out, what the expectations are, what kind of timeline restrictions you have. I mean, especially in the credit union world, timing is very important. So you really need to know when things are going to be submitted to the regulators, what the cycle is, or what the expectations are around completion of that, and timeline and budget are 2 of the most crucial things right from the beginning that you need to know up front, as well as just the overall scope. Is it just a refresh? Is it a complete rebrand? What are the expectations from the senior exec team around what exactly it looks like, the entire scope of the project, I would say.
Just to add on to that, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jolie. Go ahead, Jolie.
Sorry, Anthony. Chad just was talking about the leadership team, and just to really put a fine point on that, interview the leadership team and sit in the interview. Don't delegate that. Don't outsource that. Make sure you are sitting in the interview with the executive leadership team. And if they will let you, maybe not record it, but if they will let you record it, take good notes. Really understand what is important to each and every one of them, because depending on what their role is on the leadership team, it might be a little different. But everyone on our leadership team actually spoke about colors. They did speak about more than just the finances and the expenses, but just really make sure you're participating in those interviews with the leadership team, taking good notes, hearing what's important to them, so that you can play that back to them when you're in there the next time, and making sure you're on brief the next time you're in there.
Okay, so for me, it's about getting clarity and alignment with senior stakeholders on some very important aspects of this. And that ties into what Chad and Jolie were both saying. It really is all connected to that. But first on my list is, how does this support the business goals? What is the strategy for doing this? Is it a merger? Is it an acquisition? Is it just time for a change? Because you'll need to answer the why part of this to get both internal engagement and senior stakeholder support. If you don't have that from moment one, it'll be an uphill battle with many, many stakeholders. Second is the budget. Do you have an incremental budget? If so, how much? Over how many years? Because that will dictate your options for how you plan this. Like I mentioned that many times already with how I dealt with it at Citi. And third is the timing. Is there specific timing that you need to work within? Is there a contractual agreement connected to this? Does it all have to happen by a specific date, or is the timing open to whatever the plan dictates? And if I could actually add a fourth, I know it's going beyond, Sarah, what you said here, but this probably goes beyond the first 30 days or so, but allow room for pivoting, because even the greatest plan will have roadblocks and hurdles. So plan for change from the beginning, give yourself that buffer to work within, because it will save you from countless headaches along the way.
That's all really good advice. I think in the beginning, when you're first starting to talk to your senior leadership team about the change that's upcoming, really getting a sense of where their heads are at and why this change is coming down, and then setting up that scope, the budget, the timeline, and understanding your constraints and what you have to work within so that you can properly outline kind of what your options are to proceed. I think that really sets you up for success as you kind of move down the pipe. And what we've seen, I'm sure many of us have seen in the news over the last year, rebrands that got stuck in the messy middle, where the app has a new logo, the branches have the old one, and customers are just generally confused. How do you structure that rollout? How do you move past the first 30 days and into the couple of years that your implementation may take? Do you rip the Band-Aid off? Many of you have said that you've phased it. And how do you keep the organization aligned to those timelines? Let's start with Jolie.
Yeah, definitely. For us, we phased it. I think you have to. I think, we've also talked about just how complex and how much is involved in something like this. But, phasing it. And for us, it was definitely internal first, then external, keeping your employees with you and feeling confident in their communications of what's happening with the company so that they feel comfortable speaking about it in their communities and with our clients. We also phase things from, core or non-core. We phase things from signature properties to then our branch network. And it took a long time, and there are still things today that show up that didn't make it through the conversion process, and we address those as they come up. But it is, it's a lot of assets. We phased it. Definitely leaning on experts like Brand Active to help us with those inventory lists and making sure we get to every single thing. So definitely a phased approach for us.
Yeah, and for me, I think I covered a lot of this already today, but speaking about like best practice from this, from the lack of synchronization for a branch and how digital experiences can take longer than expected. If you're looking at like a best practice on how to structure a rollout, generally speaking, the phased approach is optimal for those very reasons I was just mentioning. And this is why a great partner like Brand Active is so important. At Citi, we worked with over 50 teams. This is all across the organization, different businesses, different regions, and really a lot of teams that sometimes we didn't even have any sort of communication with before this. So this was a really large task. So working with Brand Active with these 50 teams, it really helped us determine different approaches and budgets and create bespoke plans for each of these teams and defining ongoing engagement strategies so that I could then report on progress to senior stakeholders. And there was no way my team and I can do this alone. So approaching this with the right partner allowed me to present at various town halls to increase engagement and really sustain this over the 3 years that we needed, despite changes to personnel, to teams, to resources. And honestly, that would not have been possible without a partner like Brand Active.
Yeah, and it's the same in our situation too. I mean, as far as the phased approach, I think you'd have to be in a pretty unique situation to be able to do it all at once. So it's just safe to say that you're going to have to follow some sort of a phased strategy. With us, similar to Jolie, we used an internal campaign initially first, leveraging our employees to really get excited about the new brand and the direction that we were going, especially the frontline staff that are dealing with our customers or members if you're a credit union, one-on-one, to help get them excited too. We rolled out a brand ambassador program that, we picked we picked some really charismatic people within each business unit and basically met with them. The marketing team met with them to keep them updated, periodically where we were at with the brand, the rebrand, what some of the core pillars were and all the communications, really communicating those to these brand ambassadors who then would go to their business units and act as essentially cheerleaders for this new brand, to get everybody excited and convey all that information, where we were at, the estimated timeline for when we were going to roll things out, what it looked like from a production standpoint, all of our contingencies. There were a lot of things that we had to roll out with contingencies as well, because we were relying on dozens of vendors around signage and digital displays and things throughout all of our branches through a very wide geographical footprint. So, and along with that, you had to have contingency plans for vendors. There were several that we just didn't know when we were going to get regulator approval, and a lot of that was just out of our hands. And then when we finally did get the green light, it was go as fast as you can. And there were some vendors that fell out through the process, or they couldn't wait as long as we didn't think it was going to take that long, and had to move on to other projects. So fortunately, we had our primary resources, we had backup resources. Brand Active was a huge help in all of that. They had a lot of resources that they were able to provide for us that we didn't have, and so it's a pretty extensive process that you have to be prepared for as best you can, and just kind of plan for the worst at the same time.
Definitely. I think it's interesting. Each of you mentioned the importance of using your employee base. They're your biggest champions. They're the people that your customers interact with. And so they're the ones that can really bring your new brand to life in a really meaningful way for your customers. The other piece that I thought was really interesting was about the need for, as marketers, you need to be at the helm of growth, right? You need to be the ones that are strategically driving the new brand messaging and maximizing the impact of the growth agenda that you have in front of you. And so managing things like all of the vendors, all of the signage can be extremely challenging when you're trying to be present at things like town halls, like you mentioned, Anthony. And so I think that piece around making sure that you're not getting bogged down in the minutia of the project is really important. This has been a great session. I have another question, but we will have time for a couple of questions at the end. If any of the attendees want to put some questions in the chat, we can get to them in a moment. So feel free to just add them there. I'll close with a speed round question. If you could go back to the day that you heard about the rebrand initiative and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be? Let's start with Jolie.
Yeah, a piece of advice, if I could go back, definitely enjoy the moment, take it all in, be present, enjoy this moment, all the learnings, all the experts that are going to be a part of this journey with you. Take those learnings with you, but be training your internal team at the same time. Usually during a merger, acquisition, conversion, it's on a tight timeline. These vendors have a scope of work with an end date. So take it all in, learn it, take what you can from the experts, but be training your internal resources at the same time so that they are ready to pick up that ball and run with it as soon as all of those, scopes of work have ended. So you can move into BAU and maintain.
It's a good point, Julie. And for me, it's really understanding, I think I mentioned it a bit earlier, but understanding the why. Like, why are you doing this for a business itself? Because you may be passionate about what you're doing, and your team and colleagues might be, but the whole firm or the whole organization probably doesn't. They don't share that same passion. They don't understand the same value behind it. So if you can answer the why for them and get that support from senior stakeholders, that will have huge effect for, as you roll this out, to get engagement from colleagues, to get engagement from senior stakeholders, just to get that buy-in that you really need for that. So that's always been something that I've seen at different stops along the way. It's, while it may look great and while you may have passion for it, not everyone has that same passion. So if you can answer the why question for them, then you'll be in a good place. Yeah,
and those are both great answers. I would say for me, it's be prepared. I mean, it's going to be one of the most stressful year and a half of your life from my perspective. It was overwhelming at times, and just creating a plan, sticking to the plan, but then at the same time maintain some flexibility. Knowing that things are going to be thrown your way that you were not expecting, and trying to be flexible and reasonable and thoughtful on your approach, and take it day by day. It's a very stressful thing to go through, but it's also something that you have to realize that, no matter how long you're in marketing and what position you're in, it doesn't happen very often. And it's a really remarkable thing to be a part of, for an organization, because it can really be transformational, in many aspects, for the organization, and you can grow dramatically. I mean, we saw a 300% lift, after our rebrand, almost immediately in all of our digital channels, and it's something that you can leverage for a pretty amazing growth period for the organization. So,
got to repeat those lessons back to everyone to make sure everyone got them, because they're just so great. Even for any big project, in my opinion, be present, understand the why, and be prepared. Very important in any large transformation. We'll take a couple of questions from the chat. Claire has a great question, I think, especially with Chad's point that a rebrand might be a once in a career moment. It's something that organizations do every 10 years. And her question is, how important is a lessons learned analysis exercise after a project finishes? And would you give an example of where this was helpful to you in the past? It's for me too, but I will open it up to the panelists first.
Yeah, I actually have a good example, not more on the lessons learned and being prepared for that. So yeah, you're right that it something like this doesn't happen every day, so you don't always have that. But for example, with I can give a really recent example with Citi here. When we were first approaching the secondary colors that we were developing, this is back in 2023, and how we were evolving the color system on there, we have our own compliance testing for how these would work in digital experiences to make sure that it would work accordingly. But as we started to roll this out, and we thought we had everything covered on there, as we started to roll it out, we realized that there were certain areas within the digital teams that had much more strict use cases for how compliance would work to make sure colors would work over additional colors, and if they were ADA compliant, that's the American Disabilities Act compliant. We had a AA compliance here at Citi, but outside of that, there's also different compliance issues outside in different regions and global regions. So you have to be prepared for that. And we thought we were prepared until we got the right stakeholders in the room that we realized we had to make revisions to it and adjust it. So now that we're looking at additions to the visual identity system and evolving that over time, starting with one particular business and hoping that gets evolved over a short period of time. So we're kind of looking at it again. I made sure to bring these digital stakeholders into the room from day one so that we knew that when we start to look at colors and how they might work in these examples, we wouldn't repeat that previous mistake of not having them right away. So rather, it made it a little more expeditious than when we first did that. So that was a perfect example, and that actually just happened in like the last few years for us.
Just to follow Anthony, I think there's, along this, 2-year kind of journey, there's so many lessons learned. And yes, you dig in and you kind of evaluate each of those in that moment, but then kind of, coming out of it a few years later, the big lessons learned are, this conversion moment, this timeline, that moment, there will be a point where you need to move from we're converting to now we are operating as this new company and new brand. It is BAU. We're in a new mode. So really maintaining the relationships that you have built throughout that process is important. And also just the lessons you learn through a crisis, because whether it is a crisis like COVID or something else, there will be crises. And how do you and the rest of the company, you and your comms partners, how do you respond to that when it happens? So I think those are my big lessons learned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting on our side, almost the exact same experience as Anthony with the ADA compliance. Same thing when we were developing the visual identity. We thought we had thought of everything until you get to that digital aspect. And sure enough, we had some issues with our ADA compliance online as well. And that was a significant lesson learned, that we had to change. We had to make updates to the brand and everything based on that. We also learned a lot around managing vendors. There were a lot of signage changes in different regions throughout the entire Pacific Northwest for us that we had to leverage different vendors to make that happen. And what we didn't realize was it was a great opportunity for us to consolidate different technologies that we were using, which we didn't realize until after the process. We had different displays running on different technologies that we could have consolidated all at the same time to make it much easier for us to display content simultaneously in different locations. So that was another lesson learned on our side that we didn't realize until after we had completed the process.
Yeah, that's all really, really great advice. I think, Jolie, you mentioned something about the tips were also good for other situations that you may come across. And I think that's a really good point. One of the things that I see success in with lessons learned and postmortems is doing them frequently throughout the project. Like you are doing it in phases, and so things will come up that will be useful in your next phase. One of the things I always find interesting that comes up a lot in these lessons learned sessions is your vendor strategy. A lot of the clients that we work with they typically have incumbent vendors that they work with. And one of the lessons learned that might be helpful is your incumbent vendor typically, or they may not be set up for the size and scale of a full rebrand. And so making sure that you have the right vendor strategy, whether you're working with one partner for the entire nation or doing something more regional, really thinking through, is this the right vendor for this large scale overhaul? For example, one of our clients got a quote from their incumbent vendor that was around 15 million to be able to change over their signs. But knowing the data, we were able to help them get it down to 5 million. And so they started with signage due to the nature of their business. But when we carried that through to the other vendors, it was a really important lesson for them to think first of like, we love this vendor, they're amazing, we're going to use them operationally, but they might not be the right one for us. And so capturing those lessons through your phases can be really helpful as you continue to make decisions and pivot through the rest of the project. We have one more in the chat from Peggy. Do you have some ideas for how to expand the new brand footprint while having very little budget?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I jump in on that one. That's a tough one. I've been there. I think we've all been there in different situations where people are expecting the world on a very, very tight budget. I think you can really prioritize every aspect of the rebrand as far as digital collateral, print collateral, signage, et cetera, all the way through the entire list. Some things are very inexpensive, like digital properties are usually very inexpensive to update. You can usually do those yourself. And then print, of course, you have the print associated costs, and then signage, for example, is usually the most expensive. So you can kind of prioritize, different areas that you can affect change faster than others, but you also have to be really careful around confusing customers around the brand. I mean, you can't have multiple aspects of the brand in different locations. So sometimes it's better to wait and kind of build up some of that budget to where you can, change more things out in larger swaths than piecemealing it out. You run into a lot of issues there as well. So, I mean, as far as advice from me, I think that's, just really prioritizing from a budgetary standpoint on, what things that you can do yourselves less expensive versus the really expensive items.
Yeah, and Chad, to piggyback on what you're saying there, what that also allows you to do is if you are looking at this over, since you have a small budget, you're probably going to look to do this over a period of time. And use your annual budgets or your BAU, business as usual budgets accordingly for that. And then you'll have to reprioritize what those budgets were originally going to be used for, if you're going to then use it now for this brand refresh. But if you really have a low budget for this and you don't have additional money to spend, and even the annual budgets are going to be pushed to a limit on that, I would say really look at having this as not only a phased approach, but a somewhat longer term phase approach. Maybe it's 4 years, maybe it's 5 years. And the reason why that can be beneficial to you is that within those 4 or 5, whatever number of years, there are going to be things that are naturally sunset in that time. So you don't even have to allocate a budget to rebrand that. You can look at because if you're looking at it from the point of view of, okay, we don't have money really to spend on this, but we can do this over a period of time, then what you can really look at is, okay, what things should we sunset? What things should change? Because maybe it's a time to really take stock inventory of what you have and say, like, maybe we don't need all of these particular touch points on here. Some of these could be phased out over a period of time, and that will allow them to then not require a budget immediately. So it gives you a little more flexibility in that regard. It all comes down to that phased approach, and as you were saying, Chad, about the prioritization of those.
Yeah.
And for us, it was a little bit about, which things can you not get wrong? So making sure you get those right, you have the right investment there. Things like those signature properties, our branches, we couldn't get that wrong. That has to be right. So we prioritized by that, and the biggest impact. Not everything has the same impact. So focus, prioritize on those with the biggest impact, and then come back and get the ones with lower impact at a later time.
Great advice. Prioritization and operational cycles are really key to really maximizing your budget. As we wrap up, I just want to zoom out for a minute. What today really underscored for me is that brand evolution isn't really a moment. It's more of a management challenge. And these initiatives, they often start in the boardroom and they move very, very fast, whether it's because of M&A or another strategic pressure. And they'll land squarely on marketing's desk before all the details are clear. In those moments, the success isn't really driven by the creative part of it. It's really driven by your ability to operate. Early decisions around timing, scope, vendors, and sequencing can quietly lock in your cost and complexity long before a new brand shows up. Defending the work doesn't always mean fighting finance. It really means making trade-offs visible and making smart decisions around things like operational cycles and when data rationalizations and even a well-timed what do we need to actually retire or what can we remove the brand from are part of the conversation. A brand can stop looking like a facelift and really start looking more like an efficiency play. I really want to thank everyone for coming, and please feel free to reach out to me directly if you have some questions that weren't answered. Thank you.
Thank you.